So I've just finished Babel by Kuang, and I knew the moment I finished it, I had to start talking about it online because even though everyone is reading Yellowface at the moment, this book really blew my mind. I need to condense my feelings about it into a few minutes, talk about it on the internet. You know how we do this. I think the bar was set very high because as someone who's read the Poppy War trilogy and thoroughly enjoyed it, I am shocked to say that Babel is better. Maybe it's a recency bias, but I would go as far to say that it even trumps The Secret History from like a dark academia POV. And I'll tell you why. The problem with dark academia books is that they require willful ignorance to enjoy them. You have to let yourself be swept up in the grandeur of exclusive education, forgetting that just how elitist it is in its design, and how the people that go to schools like Oxford, they're historically rich, white, male, 1%ers who exploit the masses. And so dark academia, you're vicariously enjoying inherited privilege. So what makes Babel so special to me is how it lets you indulge in that wonderland while still being self-aware enough to admonish the corruption underneath it. And I think the discourse about colonialism is very well done. It's based in facts, the wider conversations about slavery and the Opium Wars, very impactful. And funnily enough, when I talked about the Poppy War on this page, I said, I think as well, the Hesperians as like the next big villain, they could have been a lot more villainous because they're clearly an allegory for white Europeans. And as a white European reading this, I want to feel uncomfortable about our shameful history, and yet it never quite takes me there. It could have gone much deeper. And that's exactly what Kuang does here. There were so many moments of blatant racism, sexism, microaggressions, and you could tell that every terrible thing was based on something that used to be an everyday reality in high society in the 19th century, but also reflects modern day inequalities in Britain. And what I especially love is that because it's historical fiction, it's so beautifully researched. There's footnotes, there's translations. I was in awe at the level of detail. And the details matter. Like, you could tell so much effort went into writing this to contextualise Victorian England. I really want someone to compile every book that's referenced in Babel because it's got to be over 100. And from such a broad range of genres and cultures. And yet it never felt too much. It's never oversaturated. I don't know how she does it. Something else that I really liked, and I wish more dark academia novels would learn from this, the benefits of having a smaller friendship group. Lots of books like this have 6 or 7 characters in a friendship circle, and I think that's too many. The narrative becomes too much of a balancing act. You try to include each friend enough, and yet inevitably someone in the group falls out of it, and I feel like I don't really know who they are. And so Babel is very smart because it's just 4 friends, 2 boys, 2 girls. It was so much easier to keep track of their arcs. I felt it was like I knew each of these people inside out. It was as if they were real people in my life. It also felt very similar to Game of Thrones in its use of magical realism. So the scholars at Babel, they transcribe magical properties into silver bars, but that's as close to fantasy as the story ever gets. It's a lot more grounded in reality. It's more historical fiction versus the Poppy War trilogy where there's like shamans and gods and mythical beasts. I loved the conversation about how bland British food is. I enjoy our food, but it can be very minimalistic. It's an acquired taste. You know, we don't put a lot of spices or seasoning into our food. But I like that those details are clearly semi-autobiographical, as Kuang, studying at British universities, had to acculturate into British society. I've seen people complain that the characters in this book lack nuance and are just walking caricatures to over-explain historical racism. I disagree. Not only does the cast show a very broad range of attitudes, but I think the messaging itself is passionate. It never, for me, bordered into soapboxing, and the tone doesn't feel patronising. At least I don't think it does. You know, sure, the attitudes in the book are extreme, but they're just matching what the views at the time were around the Industrial Revolution. One thing that did confound me, though, is why is Babel's secret society called the Hermes Society? Yes, Hermes is the god of language, but he does not represent silver. Artemis represents silver. Hermes represents quicksilver, which is also known as Mercury, which is why Mercury is the Roman alias for Hermes. It really should have been called the Artemis Society, but I'm splitting hairs. If you couldn't tell already, Babel is a delightful read. I loved it. My grade is S+. That's 5 stars to you. And I don't give out that rating lightly. I can be very harsh. So please go read it. Like, sure, it's challenging. 500 plus pages always is. And it's a real deep dive into language, history, literature. But it's so worth it. I really don't think you'll be disappointed.